Good evening, everyone. I'm Rinpak, and he is Fast Eddie Fear with a full power in his house, ready to go. So, just wanted to get things started, letting you guys know here at Awesemo.com we're having an NBA Finals Game 4 giveaway. If you check out our pinned tweet, you'll get all the details there. All you have to do is reply to the tweet saying with the total number of points Curry and Kawhi scored tonight, so the combined number of points, and you have to retweet the tweet and follow Awesemo_com and Awesemo NBA. And on the Awesemo NBA handle, you'll find a thread of all the free NBA content we have for tonight's single game slate, from the playoff primer to projections, rankings, and ownership projections. We're coming off of Game 3, where the Raptors pretty much controlled the game from pretty much start to finish. Danny Green showed us a replay of the 2013 Finals, and Kyle Lowry kept his hands to himself and didn't fall out. And the Warriors continued to score for the third straight game, a total of 109 points, 47 of them which came from Steph Curry. But now that was all without Klay and Looney. And today, they're both ready to go and pretty much loaded. And it's going to be very similar to kind of what we expected in Game 2 before Klay and Looney got hurt. So, Eddie, what do you expect to happen in Game 4? And how do you think the Warriors' approaches are going to be? Is it going to be something similar to what we saw in Game 2?
I think you do see DeMarcus Cousins get the start again for the Warriors, and I think you see Fred VanVleet get the start at the 2. He started the second half of Game 3, so I do think Coach Nurse puts him in to start this game. It's not incredibly relevant, excepting that it'll boost his ownership a little bit, deflate Danny Green's ownership a little bit. But we saw that the minutes for those guys going into Game 3, I was concerned that Danny Green's minutes might take a big haircut. I talked about him a lot. I liked him quite a bit in tournaments at $3,600, and he certainly performed. And his minutes aren't quite what they could be or would be in the absence of the necessity for VanVleet, especially on defense in the series. But he still got 26, 27 minutes. Really, the haircut there came off basically the threes that come off the bench, where we got very little of the McCaw Powell rotation, and so you still got because the concern was you and I have liked Lowry every game in the series, and it was gratifying to see him finally get there in Game 3. We thought it was a matchup in which he'd need to have his hands on the ball a lot, in which he would be just at his price, certainly what it was at least. He was a pretty appealing option, and was concerned about the minutes, because if you're going to play your guards of Green and Lowry and VanVleet, in theory a sum of 96 minutes, that was much easier Game 1 and Game 2, where Lowry kept getting in such foul trouble that he removed that being much of a difficulty, and you were still able to give all the time necessary. Game 3, there was none of that, and we saw Lowry get 43 minutes, and again, that came a decent bit off the bench. Going small a little bit more, shifting Kawhi down to the 4. You still got 48 minutes basically shared between Gasol and Ibaka. I think exactly shared, actually, in this game between Gasol and Ibaka at center. But it was nice to see Lowry finally get there. But again, I do think Game 2 is a much more relevant frame of reference than Game 3. When you look at these two teams and what to expect tonight. Taking Klay off the court radically changes both ends of the court. Again, we with the exception of the lamentable DeMarcus Cousins performance in Game 3, I feel like we had a pretty good handle on that slate. He's a very, very good fantasy player. Obviously was dominant in Game 2, had almost 2 fantasy points a minute, went out there, ran the team, and I thought I was pretty conservative with my projection. I had him at 30 minutes and 37 DraftKings points, which is, again, a little more than 1.2 per minute. He has been somewhere between like 1.4 and 1.6 on the season for about 5 seasons in a row. But I thought the minutes were reasonably secure with Looney injured, and I gave him a couple deductions for what's a difficult matchup with the Raptors and with Marc Gasol, but with Klay being out, especially in that opening, a real upside for him. I thought I undersold him a little bit, projecting 37, but obviously came nowhere near that. Only played 19 minutes and a little bit of change, a dozen fantasy points or so. I mean, really looked lost on both ends of the court. A few turnovers, missed a few bunnies. I mean, it was a pretty sad performance there, and so he's really an interesting question here. Is in back-to-back games we've seen a pretty exceptional upside. I'll lead it off talking about Kevon Looney. People are saying, how much do you, what do you think out of Kevon Looney? I have Kevon Looney projected for 24 minutes and 21 fantasy points. I like him quite a bit at the Stone Nuts minimum on FanDuel. I like him at $3,600 on DK. I think the ownership is going to be lower than it should be. Haven't felt like I've had a great handle on the postseason ownership. Well, Game 1 and Game 2 were good, but Game 3, I guess, specifically, I didn't feel like I had a great handle. I thought Boogie would be lower owned than he was, and he was 75-80% owned. So when I said I wanted to play 75% to get over the field, I'd have been a little bit under in a lot of tournaments. But I look at Kevon Looney as they like him. He's their best center. Their team is best with Kevon Looney on the court.
Completely
by
agree.
any sort of metric. So he's active. Is there some chance he's a decoy? Yes, there's definitely a risk there. Is there some chance that he's limited due to his injury? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. He could be of limited effectiveness. He looked good during warm-ups. I watched an extended, I didn't see any issues with mobility. I'm sure he's taken a couple pills in preparations for tonight's game to take the edge off, because when you're down there playing center with Marc Gasol, you may give him a shoulder or two, a la Nikola Jokic to Enes Kanter with the, how's the shoulder doing? You might see a couple hard lean-ins on box-outs. So, but I think the most likely scenario is he plays his 24 to potentially more minutes. 24 is me rounding it down a little. If he was fully healthy, that number would probably be like 27 for me.
Yeah, no. So, like, going off from what Looney said, so the team doctors pretty much believe if he plays, the injury cannot get worse as he plays. So that's the indication why he's playing and ready to go. He's not broken his collarbone. He is broken a bone near his collarbone. So there's a lot of people thinking he's broken his collarbone. That's why, obviously, I'm sure he's taken a fair share of Toradol and he's ready to go. Yeah, I have him just a shade under 20 fantasy points. And like you said, reiterating, he's 6K on FanDuel, and I really like that play there. And he's 3.6 on DK, and he makes another good play there. So if he's gonna play, his upside is there. If he, like you said, if he's projected, if you have him projected for 24 minutes, he can really play more than that. It's going to be interesting to see if Kerr decides to split the center minutes exactly with Cousins and Looney. It seemed like that's where they were headed in Game 2. But Bell did play his 51 seconds in there, so I'm curious. So I pretty much rules out Andrew Bogut for sure. For me, I have no interest for him at all, even though he played a great fantasy point game. But
yeah, he's always interesting when he's going to be 2% owned, but I think he's going to be like 9% owned, and I want not enough people are going to pull the ripcord as appropriate on Andrew Bogut. So yeah, I imagine I would be on 0 and let some people most of the time, pay the rake there with him.
So while we're at the center talk, and maybe we can shift to Marc Gasol now. He looked aggressive. He played much better Game 3. He was attacking Cousins from the get-go, and he was well engaged. Would you project Cousins or Marc Gasol to have more fantasy points? Obviously, their salaries differ on both sides. Gasol is $1,000 cheaper than Cousins on FanDuel. And let me pull up the DraftKings salary, but...
yeah, actually, I don't recall that one offhand. You got me.
So Gasol is 64 on DK, while Cousins is 68 on DraftKings. So how do you project Marc Gasol to do in Game 4?
Yeah, I like Gasol a little bit more. It comes into a real ownership question there. You wonder how many people will panic withdraw on Cousins, and obviously Cousins still has a giant upside and can get there a number of ways. He can just score. I mean, in his giant Game 2, he played, I believe, 28 minutes or something. It wasn't like he played infinite minutes, and he's more productive in short bursts. So you can still have DeMarcus Cousins play. He can play brilliantly. They can decide, okay, this is our Game 2 Cousins, not our Game 3 Cousins, so we're going to take it easy on Kevon Looney, who they certainly don't want to play more than they have to, probably. And he plays 30 minutes and gets 55 fantasy points. That could happen. You could have Kevon Looney takes a hard shoulder, plays 3 minutes, and then says, I'm in crushing pain, I can't go anymore, and that leads to him getting some more time. Or you can just have him be very, very productive in 22 minutes. So, I would still have some reasonable amount of DeMarcus Cousins, but the return of Klay really does matter there for me. I am equally as concerned with Klay's performance. Like during the introduction, you said they're there and they're full bore and they're ready to go. It's maybe like obviously Klay wanted to play the day before yesterday, and it's worth pointing out this is the shortest interstitial period between games in this series. Every single other gap, except for the gap between games 3 and 4, is 3 days. This one is just 2 days. Don't know how much that matters, but if we have a concern that, well, I'll start by saying, yes, I think Cousins was feeling the effects of Game 2 during Game 3. I do think absolutely conditioning, play time, the beating he takes in the game, just moving at something resembling an NBA pace for 30 minutes really took the wind out of him, and he got 3 days off and looked like shit, but still played 19 minutes. Now he's got 2 days off. Cousins is clearly not 100%, as is, at least 4 people on the Golden State Warriors, but that's one of the reasons I'm a little less excited about going out there and hunting that upside. Leg and hammy injuries really suck, so I'm, reasonably concerned about Klay Thompson. I still like him in tournaments. I'd try to restrict him to lineups I don't have Steph in if possible. Again, that was a big thing I spoke about before Game 2, where Game 1 I wouldn't got there, but the lineups that we talked about on air for both Game 2 and Game 3 would have cashed everything for me, and Game 2 had Klay in there. Not because I thought it was a particularly brilliant spot for Klay, but I didn't have Curry. And I'm a big fan of Klay when you don't have Curry. He's always fine because he can just get hot. And again, I said he could take 17 shots instead of making 7. He could make 10 or 11, and that's basically what came to pass. And he probably would have taken 22 or 23 shots in that game if he hadn't gone out with 8 minutes to go due to his injury. But I'm fine with Klay, but the risk is higher, and the ownership will have decreased. But I'm a much bigger fan if you don't have Steph Curry. Talking about we'll use DraftKings as an example. I think the only person to appear in all 3 perfect lineups through the first 3 games of the finals
is Kawhi Leonard.
Is Kawhi Leonard. No one else did because of Curry's shitty Game 2 where he was dehydrated. Excepting that, obviously, we talked a lot in the Game 3 lead up, and when they announced Klay out, I listed about 7 effects. But the first one I said is it opens up just a giant upside for Steph. And yeah, that happened. And again, it's just volume. I said I wouldn't be shocked if he took 34 shots, I think is what I said on the show, and he ended up taking, I want to say 31 or whatever, but he got into the 30s in shots, and that's going to get
like
you
37
home.
For the record. But yeah,
What'd you say?
He took 37. So
I'm almost certain that's not correct. Take a second, but I'm almost certain it was 31. I could be wrong. I could have just read it once and seen a crooked number. And anyway, regardless, he took infinite shots, and that was the key to his success.
You are correct. I stand corrected. 31 is.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's sans Klay, which we shouldn't expect to be the case today, although it's possible. So whenever we talk about Steph, we're going to end up talking about Kawhi at the same time because they are exactly the same price on FanDuel and $300 apart from each other on DraftKings in the captain spot. But yeah, that's where I was going. 200 if they're not the captain. I again at this point with Klay back and everything that's going on have Kawhi for about a point over Steph. You and I were talking about projections before the show. What did you have for the two of them?
I have just a shade under 52 for Kawhi and just a shade under 49 for Curry. So
okay,
two between 2 and 3 more for Kawhi.
Yeah, and it's again we talk about projections a lot, and having an accurate projection system is incredibly useful, especially combined with a series of good ownership really is a hell of a lot of the work to doing well at GPPs. But there's a point to which the precision is kind of irrelevant. So both around 50. So then it ends up being some sort of A, an ownership question, and B, how else you build your lineup around that. If you don't have Kawhi in your lineup, I'm a big fan of making sure you have Lowry and Siakam, or Lowry and Gasol, or Lowry, Siakam, and Gasol, or like someone's going to have to score for this team. If you don't have Steph in your lineup, I'm a big fan of having Klay. And I'm more of a fan of having Cousins, and more of a fan of having Iguodala, and more of a fan of having Draymond Green, who benefits from Curry's potential down game in this example, and that he always picks up his peripheral stats, etc., and also does a little more distribution, more likely to get his 10 assists and a triple-double, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about Draymond. What do you think here? He came back to earth in Game 3. I've been more negative than most people on him in this series. Again, he's been 48 to 55% owned basically every single game of the slate. Wasn't worth it Game 1, wasn't worth it Game 3. Got there in Game 2, I think it's fair to say, with some help from Steph sort of disappearing for that game, and even then didn't hit a ton of an upside. But I did go back and revise my thinking a little bit and say that he is still my third highest projected player for this game. So I like him more in the absence of Curry or Kawhi. Not that it's real easy to afford the three of them anywhere. But because you just need him, especially on FanDuel, but even probably on DK, to be the second highest scoring guy. And he can do that through his own performance. And again, almost every game in this series, I've had him projected for 40 or a touch under or a touch over that. He's still in that range for me today. But with all hands back on deck and Klay back in there and more people playing, you end up with slightly higher ceilings for all the guys we're talking about. So I'm a little bit more of a fan of his than I was Game 1 and Game 3. But again, points per dollar, not worth it on DK.
No, he's 10-4 on DK and 13-5 on FanDuel.
13-5 is closer. 13-5 as opposed to 16 grand for the top dogs is a little closer. Ending up, again, non-captaincy, $1,000 less on DK for me. He's just not points per dollar the best play for me. So if you don't have Steph, that's fine. But I see a lot of people going, I love him here. I think he's going to have a triple-double again. It is not a good matchup in his, very, very good game with everyone else sort of, with Klay going out and Steph being injured and all the weird stuff that happened in that game, and actually got to play a couple minutes at the 5, and Looney absent, he got up to 48. Points per dollar at 50% ownership, dude's just not worth it. I don't know what to tell you, but my level of disdain isn't quite as high as it was for really all three of the first three games, where it was just like, yeah, that strikes me as generally wrong. It's a little more likely with all hands back on deck that he just sort of slides into that number 2 spot and makes your lineup get there. And on FanDuel, where the price is cheaper, and he's getting 3 for a steal and a block, not that, Toronto turns over the ball a lot. It's important when you talk about, this is, and again, I just think this sort of basic fact gets overlooked a lot. This is an incredibly compelling Raptors defense. This is the best defense I think this Warriors team has played in this entire 5-year run for a series. Yeah. And, we talk about Golden State scoring 109 points every game. They scored, I think, 117 or 118 points a game during the regular season. And that includes with plenty of times they were winning so much that there was blowout time in the fourth quarter, and so that reduced the starters' average minutes to 29, and so it's sort of a significant thing for me. So with Cousins expected to continue to get some time, with Looney there and to some degree healthy, with the unlikelihood that with Durant not back, he's getting significant time at the 5. I still think he's good for 40, 41 fantasy points, and that generally is not going to math out correctly, and that's been the case 2 games out of 3 so far. So maybe the ownership comes down based on, an off game last time, and the first game of the series he had a triple-double. Wasn't a great one. It was triple tens. But
it was the 10-10-10, yeah.
Yeah, he had 40 fantasy points. That didn't turn anyone off. Ownership stayed about there. Second game, again, got up to 48 with all those guys out and the weirdness going on. So, if you think the ownership goes down to 37, 38%, that's probably the point of equity where I would be like, okay, that's about where Draymond should be. For every player at their salary, there's a point at which their ownership should be to be, even with the field. Which leads me to, talk about Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry got it going, led the offense, played his 43 minutes and change, same as Steph Curry, but I think those minutes come down. I think it had something to do with him running quite so hot there. It's certainly not impossible he plays 43, 44 minutes again, but I have him at 41 for a projection, which matters when you're looking at him. And again, he got lots of Steph Curry defense and just the entire... Whenever I talked about Game 3, and people are like, without Klay, I'm worried about the offense. I was always worried about the defense. Because now, you have to put more time on guys who cannot defend, which includes Cousins, frankly, in that game, and frequently DeMarcus Cousins, but Bell, who is a liability when he's out there, Jerebko gets time, McKinney gets extra time, Cook gets extra time. Those guys are all legitimately bad defenders. And, you saw that with really the ease Toronto had in that game. Now you put Klay Thompson back out there. A lot of people have stated that they're worried about Lowry because now Klay guards him again. I don't know if that's what happened. It'll be interesting to see if that's what happened. But in Game 2, remember that Steve Kerr shifted and Klay Thompson primarily defended Kawhi Leonard after Game 1 primarily defending Kyle Lowry. They've swapped it around a lot, but frequently in that system you end up with Draymond Green defending Kyle Lowry, and that's no great shakes either. So I worry about the ownership. I still like $8,000 Kyle Lowry. You and I liked him in this series from the beginning at his price. I still have him projected for 33, 34 fantasy points a game. Without Klay, that ticked up a little bit for me. I'm bringing him back to 33 or 34. He's fine. But I'm worried, especially with the absence of any really significant value on both sides, setting aside Looney. One of the reasons I really like Looney tonight is value is getting really tough to come by.
Agree.
Both sides. So that's one of the reasons I, and quite possibly a lot of people, are kind of excited to play Kevon Looney, although there's obviously a significant risk there. But I think a lot of people get on Kyle Lowry. So I'm less on him today than I was for any of the first 3 games.
And I completely agree with you on in terms of ownership in that standpoint. But my main thing that I think an easy way just to get an ownership differential is on FanDuel is playing Kawhi at MVP instead of Steph after Steph went pretty much ballistic in Game 3. So I think we don't know how much they'll be owned in those respective spots because FanDuel doesn't show them. But I think that's one thing that I'm looking at as I build my lineups is having more Kawhi in the MVP spot than Steph, just in terms of I do have Kawhi projected more, but also I think he won't be as owned as high as Steph in the MVP. Maybe I'm wrong, but it will be interesting to see.
No, I agree with you.
How that plays out.
Steph's at home. He's coming off a monster game. Has generally been a little more highly owned relative to Kawhi than I think he should have been this series. And again, you and I have him projected basically at the same point. So yeah, I'll take the guy who is lower owned, who isn't coming off the massive game. And it's also worth pointing out, whereas I'm sure Kawhi is a bit patushed himself, Steph was tired at the end of that game. Like, he did slow down towards the end of that game, and they did not rest him in the second half until they yanked him for the blowout with not a whole lot of time left there because they were trying to make a real run at that game because going down 2-1 is obviously very significant.
Speaking of massive eruption spots, how about Serge Ibaka?
Yeah, got there.
He got out there. He was blocking everything. So he is, let's see, I'm going to say he is 75. He's 8K on FanDuel and 44 on DraftKings. I have him projected for a shade of above 20 points. I think that's a little on the high side. I might take that down.
Yeah, they announced the starting lineups right as we were going on air. Somehow I didn't miss them. I was right about Cousins. He's still starting. They are starting Danny Green again. Doesn't particularly matter. Fred VanVleet started the second half last game. I don't know if that'll happen again, but it's not a terribly relevant thing to look at, and it would make me be more comfortable playing VanVleet. He's not as cheap as I would like him to be, but he's just a guy who's going to get 33, 35 minutes, can make some three-pointers. And I think a lot of people follow the Danny Green train. And again, the value is shit, and he's fairly cheap. But I do think if you think Klay plays the game healthily, and again, it's difficult on one-game slates to build narrative lineups, but building I think Klay gets hurt lineup makes a fair amount of sense, and you go Steph, Danny Green, so on and so forth. Or I think Kevon Looney gets hurt, I'm going to play, Andrew Bogut and DeMarcus Cousins and, the rest of this team.
And I agree with pretty much exactly what you said there. So we are 25 minutes to lock. So
one of the fun stats I read someone said about Game 2 is that talking about Malcolm Brogdon during the Bucks couple of series there, we talked about the fact that this year he joined the 50-40-90 team which again I think like 9 people have been on in the history of the game, and they're all Dirk Nowitzki, etc. They're some of the best players in the history of the game. And Malcolm Brogdon got there this year. The Raptors got there as a team last game, to give you an idea of how much that Warriors unit struggles with, especially perimeter defense, but just defense in general. When you get Klay out of there, and have a limited. You only need one hole. When you have a couple holes on your team at all times defensively, when you have to play 25, 27 minutes of Quinn Cook, when you have to put Jerebko out there, when you have to give 18 minutes to Alfonso McKinney, Raptors are a really good team, really good shooting team, and so they definitely lit him up pretty nicely.
Definitely.
It was nice, really. I do want to say it was really nice to see that Steph Curry performance. Like having Durant in town, we haven't seen it as much. The struggles he had for parts of the Clippers series, there was a real question: is he going to be able to go out there and make this work? And it was really nice. Those are a real vintage.
It's like since Durant has been there, it's like we kind of been robbed of this Steph Curry, those MVP back-to-back MVP years. So, and it was great to see he dropped 47, and then. Obviously, NBA Twitter went straight to, that's how LeBron feels. And yeah, it kind of did. Definitely. It was interesting to see how he did that. But that was definitely fun to watch. And it would have been great if they pulled off that win. But Toronto just played phenomenal from start to finish.
Yeah, they're a good team. I mean, they've been underestimated by many people, including myself at various points during the year. And they haven't played this well the entire year. People underrated the Gasol move. There are matchups in which he is brilliant. This is yet another one. We're going to talk about how Cousins was tired and played like shit last game. Yeah, but having Marc Gasol there is really, really, really relevant. He knows how to pass as a big guy. I like Serge Ibaka a lot, and again, picked up infinite blocks. Some of his extra time came at the expense of Marc Gasol being in a little bit of foul trouble again. I think Gasol ended up with a bit over 26 minutes, and Ibaka ended up with a little bit under 22. Mm-hmm. But I would expect that to split back to 31 and 17, 30 and 18, 29 and 19 more likely. You can obviously still play Ibaka in a tournament. We've talked about him every game and said, he can pop off in whatever time he gets. He got 5 extra minutes due to the foul trouble and just went block crazy. So
yeah, he's been in the perfect FanDuel lineup twice out of the 3 games. Just once on DraftKings.
Just once on DK.
Yeah, so he's been there twice on FanDuel, and obviously those blocks, he can pick those up rapidly.
3 for a block, but again, a little less likely to happen when you have Klay taking 20 shots from behind the 3-point line as opposed to what have you with guys trying to get into the paint.
I agree with you on that. So now let's get to Klay. We haven't talked much about Klay. We've talked about how much of a difference he makes, but how do we like him for the as a play tonight? He's 8,600 on DraftKings, and he is how much is he on FanDuel? He is 11.5 on FanDuel. So what's your take on it? And like obviously there's the beat reporter said there's no enforced minutes restriction, but how healthy is his hamstring? We don't know, but what do you think how does the game flow go for him? How do you think he'll end up doing in this matchup as we saw in the first 2 games?
It's tough. So like FanDuel, he's $500 more than Kyle Lowry, which I like because I think a lot more people play Kyle Lowry. So I like trying to make that move if you can get him in. As I mentioned previously, I like him a lot if you're not playing Steph Curry for some reason. But there's, it's not just... All right, Klay Thompson in a vacuum in this matchup is a very tough matchup for him. And now we're adding in the fact that there is a higher potential for re-injury. And again, you try to quantify these things. It's kind of tough. But in a normal game, there's somewhere around a 2% chance that Klay or Kevon Looney will leave or get reduced minutes due to injury. As far as, leaving the game, we'll call it 2%. And, for tonight, I'd say that number is like 10 for both of them. So there's the additional risk of that, but there's just also the chance that he's a little hesitant. Like, he's just like, look, Steph's shown that he can do plenty of work. Instead of taking 17 shots tonight, if you ask me to guess the over-under on his shots tonight, I'll say 13.5. I think it comes off to a measurable number. So, do I like him in tournaments? Yes, without Steph. Yes, on FanDuel, where I expect a lot of people to go at $11,000 Kyle Lowry. There's a couple other good plays in the $10,000 to $11,000 range. Especially if you don't have Steph, I think you can absolutely make that construction work. But as far as a points per dollar play, no, I still don't think he ends up being particularly brilliant. And it's not, impossible to think that we talk as if people are, chasing Steph Curry and now Klay's back and it's a bad matchup. There's still upside for Steph Curry when Klay is hesitant. Like Steph, instead of going from 18, 20, 22 shots to 31, goes to 25, that still helps quite a bit. So when I say I have, Kawhi a point over him and you have him, I think, 3 points over him, I'm a little hesitant there just because you have to amortize in that fraction of the time where Steph goes a little bit more nutters because Klay is limited or absent.
That's true. That's a good point that you definitely do bring up there. And continuing onto the Curry and whatnot, and so do you expect them to pretty much open up with the same defensive matchups as they opened up the second half of Game 2, where Klay ended up started guarding Kawhi, and they put Iguodala on Siakam, Draymond on Lowry, and Danny Green was on
Steph was on Danny, and the centers matchup is always, and those two things project to be basically the constants. Here, even in the last game, we got some of a little bit more of Steph on Lowry due to the options were not ideal there. And again, Livingston didn't pick up any extra time in that start. It should be pointed out. He played 17 or 18 minutes or 16 all 3 games of this series. The minutes actually broke down the way we thought they would. I said I thought Cook would get the most, and that came out. Now, none of those guys were good. Cook, McKinney, Livingston, none of them managed to capitalize. And again, they while they struggled defensively, as has been extensively discussed, the offense was obviously also not super firing on all cylinders, with the exception of Klay's really, really nice ISO game. Steph's really nice ISO game. He just showed the ability to break guys down. His first quarter especially, but the first half and until he really got tired as the game progressed. Again, that was just he single-handedly made that game competitive while he was out there. But as he faded, so did they as the game went on. But yeah, I'm so with the provisos stated, I can't have an issue with running Klay Thompson out there. You hope that his ownership is limited due to the injury to 20%. If it's like 33%, then I would come in under that number certainly.
And this I want to shift to Iguodala, who's been in the perfect lineup twice. He was in there on DK on games 2 and 3, and it's like another tough matchup again. I have him for I think just 20%. A shade under 25 fantasy points. What's your take on now that Klay's back and everything, and he's also banged up for sure. Yeah. So how do you expect the game script to go for him?
Yeah, it's interesting the things that sort of have to happen for guys to hit into lineups. His price ticked up a little more, I believe. His price for Game 2 was 46, for Game 3 was 56, and for tonight is 58. So his price is ticking up a little bit more.
10K on FanDuel, so he's the same price as Marc Gasol on FanDuel.
Yeah, I almost don't like mentioning the perfect lineups because of the fact that the guys who enter them are there's so many reasons a guy happens to make the perfect lineup. There are times like we talked about the Draymond Green game. Draymond Green was in the perfect lineup. He was basically the last guy in Game 2, where his 48 got you in there. You had better games out of Klay, who cost a couple $1,000s less and had 42 fantasy points and got hurt, or certainly would have exceeded him. That was the one game Fred made it in. Iguodala was 4,600 that game, as we said, and put up his 30. And then that was the game Cousins went off. You wanted him as your captain. And then Kawhi, who's been there every day, was in there again, giving you his, I think he had 55 or 60 in that game. So it wasn't like, Draymond had a great game, but that's, why I took the time to point out that you don't necessarily need to have a great game. You can just be number 2 guy. And if enough value gets there, you get there. So to me, to an extent, I like Iguodala a bit more tonight based on the fact that the value is so notably absent, and that's one of the things that knocks him a little bit. Like, if he gets there tonight, it's likely in a scenario where of Kawhi Curry, one of them gets 55, the other one gets 45, so you can afford to get away from the one who has 45, and you manage to fill it out with Lowry, Gasol, Iguodala, Cousins gets there, whatever, and you manage to fill it out with 6, 7, 8K guys, so that Iguodala's 28 is good for you, or 24. So I kind of like him because the absence of value increases my appreciation for him. But at the same time, price has come up a little bit more, and he's certainly not super upside guy. And again, Klay is back. So, there's like, you're right, he did make it in game 3, but he put up like 25 fantasy points. It was a bit of an aberration that he sort of snuck in there on the back door. So, I end up being largely ambivalent. I don't like to have a take just for the purpose of having a take. If I say Iguodala, I'm like, yeah, he's a guy, he's there, he's going to play. He's going to play 30 minutes. He's going to get, I'd project him for 24, 25 fantasy points. He can tick up and do a little better than that, give you 30, give you 31, which I think is his high for the series. Can give you 20, 21. Klay being back doesn't particularly help him, and it's still a bad matchup. So I wish I could turn around and be like, yeah, Iguodala, or fuck no Iguodala, but just one of those guys, like, he's there, you can do it. Like, I would generally rather run a similarly priced Fred VanVleet, I think. I have him projected very similarly. I think I actually have Fred a tick higher. And I just think the ownership is a little bit better because Iguodala has been in the more successful lineups. Again, Fred VanVleet was in the perfect in game 2, I think.
Game 2. Yeah, he was in the perfect in game 2.
So I think you get marginally better ownership there, and I'm projected pretty similar, so I'd probably go there. But again, not another guy I'm super thrilled with, but I'd rather have 22% Fred VanVleet or 25% Fred VanVleet as opposed to 32% Andre Iguodala. So I think that's where I come down a lot, but it's a very nominal distinction for me.
So let's in speaking of Fred VanVleet, obviously for me the favorite bench players based off both teams that I'm looking at right now are Looney for Golden State and Ibaka and VanVleet for Toronto. Is there anyone else that you have any interest at their price with the news that we have been dealt with Klay starting and Looney available to play? Is there anyone else that you might be considering?
Yes. Probably not on FanDuel. Okay. I don't think anyone else makes a ton of sense because of the existence of Looney. Can it still happen? Sure. But you are looking at specific pricing scenarios where you get a big interstitial gap between the 4th and 5th guy or 3rd and 4th guy, and you just need a $1,000 guy. So, for example, we had in the last series where we had... pardon me, not in the last series. In game 1 of this series, we had Sean Livingston get there. At his, I think he was $2,200 in game 1 of the series and had 15, 16 fantasy points. That guy can get there, and $1,000 guy who gets 9 can also get there. So you get some very unique lineup structures because nobody wants to play Alfonso McKinney. Nobody wants to play Pat McCaw's probably a little too cute, but I know he's $1,000. Let me look at the. Let me actually look at the mega cheaps.
I can read them up. I have them ready to go. So starting with. After Looney, it goes Quinn Cook 3K, Livingston 2.6, McKinney 2.2.
Yeah, I don't mind Livingston 2.6. I apologize for interrupting you, but I will interrupt a little bit there. Guy's getting 16, 17 minutes. I'd project him for 12 to 13 fantasy points, I think. That's not dreadful. There's a real chance that his average game is in the best possible lineup. Now, he will be owned more than all the guys we're about to talk about above and below him for that reason. But I don't have an issue with, again, value is shit, as we're discussing. You have Looney at 3.6, Livingston at 2.6. Cook at 3 probably goes back to playing not incredibly, significant minutes. He played 9 minutes in game 1. He closed out game 2 with Klay gone. He played 27 minutes in game 3 with Klay obviously completely absent. I'd probably project him for 12 or 13. But the ceiling's there, but I think the ownership will be there a little bit more than I like there. So you're looking at $1,600 Jordan Bell, $1,400 Jonas Jerebko, who's going to play 9 minutes, give or take a couple. Really, none of the flat $1,000 are going to even play without blowout time. That's interesting. I assumed you were still getting $1,000 McKinney or something. You're not.
No.
But you get a really unique lineup structure when you run Jonas Jerebko, who costs $1,400 and is probably the cheapest guy I would want to run in a lineup because he can score 12 fantasy points in 9 minutes, and you get really unique lineups where that allows you to have, picking names out of a hat, this may not add up, but something like Steph and Kawhi and Lowry and Draymond, and then you play, Looney Jerebko is the only way you can afford to do that, and then Looney gets there and he didn't play Cousins, and you played Jerebko and he got there, and that ends up being the best possible lineup. So, yes, to that extent, because it gives you very unique lineups, because again, only 4% of people are playing Jerebko. I don't have an issue playing, especially on DraftKings FanDuel. It's tougher, especially with the existence of Looney at the minimum, and the lesser space to hop up to some of those other guys. But if you have Jerebko, Quinn Cook, Looney, Livingston, I think all those guys bear some interest as bench options in addition to all the guys you talked about.
So you're after Livingston, you're most interested in, let's say, leaving money on the table and playing Jonas Jerebko out of all those scrubs?
I mean, that's a lot of money. At that point, you're sort of like, I don't mind leaving $500, $800 with Jonas Jerebko, taking out straight Sean Livingston at 26, I think it is, and putting in $1,400 Jerebko is a little too cute for me because one of the reasons you do it is you open yourself to having just a stud-filled lineup other people can't afford. And B, you need Jerebko to outscore Livingston, which is only going to happen 1 game out of 3, in addition to all these other guys. So, generally, if I'm hand building a lineup and I throw Jerebko in there, I would not want to leave a pile of money on the table because I've gotten rid of one of the 2 ways in which playing Jerebko makes my lineup exceptional.
Okay. All right, that's a good way of explaining it for sure. So we're about under 7 minutes to lock. Let's get to questions on the Premium Slack. Feel free to tag us. Is there anything else you want to cover that we didn't touch base on in terms of value, players, or something that right off the top of mind before we tackle these questions?
I would take 30 seconds and read out the projections you read me before the show, all of which I'm within about 6%. Well, some I guess I'm about 10% off on, but very, very close to. And just throw out some numbers for people, just in case it's worth 30 seconds, and it might tickle someone's fancy.
Sure thing. Okay. I had McKinney at 6.9, Iguodala at 24.5, Danny Green at 19.8, Cousins at 32.7.
I'll stop you and say that's a little high for me on Cousins.
Yeah, that's what
I think I would have Cousins at like 20 minutes, 25 fantasy points. I'm not shocked remotely to see 30. I'm not really shocked to see 40. And like, I just make sure you don't have Looney in your Cousins lineup. There is obviously a big upside there, but it cannot work out several ways. The most likely one is Looney plays his complete time and Cousins only plays X minutes, but I won't go through all the ways Cousins can get there again. But I do think if I had to, gun to my head, guess an average for Cousins today, I think I'd have to bring it down to closer to 25.
Okay. Let's continue. Draymond at just above 38. Fred VanVleet at 24.5. Ed Jerebko slightly under 5. Kawhi at 52. Looney at just under 20. Klay just above 33. Kyle Lowry at 35.5. Gasol just under 30. Norman Powell just a shade above 6. Siakam just a shade under 38. Quinn Cook for 9, Ibaka for a shade above 20, Livingston just a shade under 10, and Steph Curry for 49.5.
Okay. The one thing I'll mention is we didn't talk about Siakam a lot. I like him quite a bit in tournaments. I think the ownership will have descended. We're obviously a few games removed from his most special performance. So I do think his actual ownership will be a little bit under where it should be relative to his price and how he can pop off an upside. So, and again, I'm just a little more excited to play Raptors than Warriors in this series based on their prices and how they've been derived. But let's bang out some questions really fast.
Sure thing. Let's pull these up. Who do you think? Who do you think has the better game tonight, Gasol or Boogie? That's like the.
I have Gasol about 3 fantasy points higher as far as the projection goes. So, gun to my head, I would pick Marc Gasol to score more fantasy points tonight.
Okay. Thoughts on Lowry at captain? Yeah, he's fine at captain. It depends on
No
who
issue
else.
whatsoever. Much
Yeah,
less cute than it was, and he's actually been significantly owned every game, even when he was coming off shitty game one and shitty game two. He's still maintained a pretty significant ownership, so I'm fine with it, but it's not going to be as unique as you might think it is.
I agree. Best points per dollar captain on DK. There's a lot of good captain spots.
It's much less obvious than it used to be, and it's worth pointing out best points per dollar player and best captain are not. The Venn diagrams would get close to overlapping, but those aren't exactly the same thing. Like best point per dollar captain is just a question of who you think is your best points per dollar player, and for me that probably ends up being Kevon Looney, who I think is fine at captain. But I think I have Kevon Looney at something like, slightly higher fantasy points per dollar than anyone else, though it's really close, where I have him projected for, a little over 20 fantasy points at 3,600. So he's at 5.7 fantasy points per dollar, per $1,000 or what have you. As opposed to, I have Steph and Kawhi closer to 5 and Draymond and a number of other guys at 4 and a little bit. So, but I don't have a strong answer, and then again, we only have a couple minutes, so I don't want to guess at it too much. But yeah, talked about a lot of guys. Got to make your own decision there. I like Pascal a lot. I'll throw that out there again.
Gasol, Iggy, or Gasol, Iggy, or Cousins if you're playing Looney. Wait, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so he's playing Looney. Do I play Gasol, Iggy, or Cousins? I would probably play Gasol.
Okay. Quinn Cook or McKinney?
I would play Quinn Cook if price is not an issue. You have to spend up a little bit for him on DK, but if price isn't an issue, I would still run Quinn Cook out there.
Do you mind just hopping on in there in the Slack real quick? I'm just trying to make one final adjustment on my line. So,
again, we're down to about a minute, so not a ton to talk about here. But let me get up to our current stuff and grab questions. Any spread or over/under takes? No. Ibaka or Danny Green? Probably go Ibaka at this point. Thoughts on Gasol or Van Vliet? Gasol would certainly be my cashier choice there. Probably Van Vliet more often than not for me in tournaments at this point. Either site, GPP, do you prefer Serge or Danny Green? Probably going with Serge at this point, believe it or not. We did that. Better build tonight, 4 Golden State, 2 Raps, or 4 Raps, 2 Golden State. Still 4 Raps, 2 Golden State for me. It's been that basically every day thus far in this series. Covered most about everything through the questions. And we're about 15 seconds out, so by the time I could answer anything, it's not going to be particularly relevant anyway. Don't think there's any significant overlay, and I don't really have time to check at this point. Sorry about that. All right, we have started. We are at lock.
All right, let's play a Friday night edition of Daddy Like.
Oh, it's been too long. We don't call it Daddy Like nearly as much as we should anymore. That was I think, shout out to our own Kawhi, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here.
He is I believe, the creator of.
Yeah, I think he gave that its appropriate nom de guerre, if you will. So are we FanDueling or DraftKingsing with this?
Let's change it up a little bit. We got one final question. Who do you think wins tonight? I want to say the Warriors win tonight. I've been 3-0 so far, so in terms of who wins, I will I'll flip it around to the Warriors this time.
I'll agree. I actually don't know the line on this game. Someone asked about the line.
I think it was 4.5 this afternoon. It might have moved.
Yeah, I mean it was frankly a stupid line before Game 3. The fact that the Warriors were still favored without Klay there was.
I would have been a lot more invested in throwing in my entry fees into a Raptors bet instead of putting it on Boogie Cousins that night. But it is what it is. All right, let's get started. Let us start with Kevon Looney on FanDuel.
Who on FanDuel?
Kevon Looney on FanDuel at $15.
That's a great question.
The $15 tournament, he's 6K.
You let out a big smile, so I'm gonna go I'm going to metagame this. I'm going to go to the game within the game and say it's lower than you expected, and you're pleased that it's low. And I'm going to say 19%.
Say that again, sorry.
19%.
Well, take away 10 from that. He's at 9.8%.
Yeah, that doesn't math out quite right for me. Like
He's the best value at 6K on FanDuel, and he's at 9.8%.
Well, in fairness, the best value for the last game, all the best value was basically unowned, and it was all shit. So maybe the trend continues. Like, I don't know if you remember the last time we did this, but both Cook and Livingston were owned shit. And they did shit. So apparently, people knew something there. Yeah, that doesn't make it. I'd be thrilled with that. God, I'd be the world's biggest Kevon Looney fan. Right? I don't know what I would have had, but I suspect 30 or 40.
Does Daddy like, or does Daddy love?
Daddy loves 10% owned Kevon.
Right.
That's crackerjack.
A little Daddy Love Friday night edition. So let us move on to, let's go, Steph Curry.
It's going to be a goddamn number. Yeah, Steph and Kawhi. Steph and Kawhi on FanDuel. I'll say Steph is 79% owned.
He is 75% owned. So 75.
Okay.
Yeah.
I probably should have realized that people weren't as on Looney as they should have been, and that would bump the number down a hair. But okay. And Kawhi is going to be less. I'm going to say Kawhi is. Let's see. Especially with no one playing Looney, the cap was really tight, so a lot of people are going to move away, even though, again, in the perfect lineup every goddamn day. 64.
He is 69.3%.
Interesting. Closer than I would have thought.
Yep. Let's bounce over to someone who we haven't been really high on, besides maybe Game 3 in Draymond Green at 13.5 on FanDuel.
Yeah, price went up $500. Production came down in the last game. Sheeple will, so it'll be his low point for the series. I'll say 43.
He is 52.4%.
Jesus, people. Okay.
Yeah.
It's FanDuel. It's a little better. The price is better there. The number will be about right for DK. I can't remember what his FanDuel ownership was. I think his FanDuel was higher than his DK, so I subtracted from the wrong number. So I'm preloading my 43 guess on DraftKings when we get there.
All right, I will write this down. Serge Ibaka coming off, or Serge Ibaka back to his OKC days.
29.
37.7%. I went a little under that, but
yeah, I mean, obviously it can happen.
He's 8K.
He's been really good twice. I would also come in under that.
Mm-hmm. So Klay Thompson.
Yeah. $11.5, you said?
He is.
I said I wanted him if he was like 20, and not if he was going to be in the mid 30s, which I suspect is where he ends up. So I'll say 34.
He is 42%. So
yeah, I mean that number came down. He was as high as, I don't know if he hit 13. He was certainly 12.5 at one point in the series. Yeah, I'd want less than that. Just really easy to beat 40% of the field if he pulls up lame 1 out of 10 games, or just a little little less involved, and only like. I would only project him for 34, 35 when healthy, so now, I don't know. But, okay, not shocking.
And then, let's find a Kyle Lowry. Where are you, Kyle?
Wouldn't think it'd be that hard?
No. It's maybe my FanDuel's running a little slow. Maybe I got too many things right now.
I'm preloading a 41.
Well, I can just tell you Andrew Bogut is 9%, 9.6%.
There is a very, very, very good chance he does not touch the court.
Yeah.
I almost said before, and I should have, like, today is the first day in which I felt advantaged against the field, because I thought people would fuck up the Looney ownership, fuck up the Klay Thompson ownership, mess up the Bogut ownership, where, yeah.
Danny Green. Let's go to Danny Green.
He was up to what, 75 on FanDuel? I need to know the price. I don't
He's
know.
up to 75, yeah, on FanDuel.
32? Again, no
yes,
one.
on the dot, 32.9%. But yeah,
That's not on the dot. That's 33.
uh,
That's
giving,
Price is Right within $100. I win both Showcase Showdowns, but that's not.
All right, Fred VanVleet.
Lower than he should be. 24.
He is 22.1%. Kyle Lowry.
41.
37.6.
That's less than I would have thought. Came
Yeah.
off a big game,
Especially
played 43
after
minutes,
that big
11,000.
game.
Like he's less than Klay.
Now I'm trying to find a DeMarcus Cousins. This is going to be.
He is also 11,000. So that's that's gonna be a nice number. He's gonna be in the 20% range, and that's gonna feel pretty good. I'll go with 23. I think he gets a bit over 20, but man, maybe not.
Marc Gasol.
He's also 11. No, he's 10. They brought him back down.
Yeah.
34.
He's 23.8%.
I like that a lot. That he likes.
Okay. DeMarcus Cousins.
23.
22.6%.
There we go. That's right on the nose. We round correctly around this house. Nailed it.
Yeah. Is there a player who I missed that you would like to
I don't know. I can't think anyone. Let's go to DK.
All right. I got DK loaded up. All right. Let us start with Kevon Looney.
Well, what do you said he was 10 on FanDuel?
Yeah.
DK's 36. The value is even a little shittier. It's going to be the same range. I'll say 11.
He is 12.51%. And do you want to know who also is 12 points? Who is also he's 12.43% owned. Do you want to take a guess?
Bogut. It's going to be Bogut.
Yep. It is Bogut.
When you bring it up in that context. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, there's a chance I'm going to look really stupid, and I don't think it works out that way most of the time, but there's some chance they're like, oh, Kevon Looney's active, but, he's getting the OG Anunoby who's been active for 2 consecutive games and hasn't touched the court treatment, but I don't know. That's amazing. So the rake was paid by Andrew Bogut today. Thank you, you big, beautiful Aussie.
Who do you think is the most highest owned player on DK?
Steph Curry.
All right, percent?
70. Where he was there on FanDuel. Should be a little less. 6.
He is 75% owned also on DraftKings. All right, let's go to Draymond Green. You said 43, correct?
Yeah, I locked in 43. It should be his lowest point of the series. So 43.
He is 44.5. 44.2% owned.
Off by 1. All right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Danny Green.
Yeah, again, value is pretty shitty. Coming off a big game. Should drive him into the 30s. I'll go 34 again.
34. That is correct. Wait. Danny Green is 35.7% owned.
All right, it's 36. That's fine. Once you have the FanDuel numbers, it's just a little bit of hodgy-podgy adjusting.
All right. Let's do Sean Livingston.
Yeah. 2,600. I normally would have said like 15, but not enough people owned there. Steph was where we expected. There's going to be, again, 65 or 70 on Kawhi. 21.
He is 17.2%.
I like that.
Let's
I'm pretty
Quinn Cook.
Less than that. He was 3,000 to Livingston's whatever. Again, he got way more minutes than Livingston last game. I don't know if that keeps up. So he should be well less, but he's probably not. So you said Livingston was 17 and change. I'll say 14.
15, yeah. Kyle Lowry.
$8,000 there. I would have had him about the same on both sites, as he was still about the same at 8 and 11, too cheap on both sites. So on FanDuel, we had him in the mid to high 30s. So I'll say the same thing, 38-ish.
37.6. Nice.
Oh, right on. I'll take it. There's no.
DeMarcus Cousins.
DMC. A little better on DK. 29.
36.
Okay.
And Marcus Gasol is also 36.
Really? That's a lot of people ask that question. It's a very reasonable, pair off there.
Yeah.
Cousins obviously a higher ceiling. It's certainly safe to say. Gasol a little.
And Serge Ibaka.
Me a number on DK, even with the price bump, but at X4 now, 40?
44.5. And that leaves us with Kawhi Leonard and Pascal Siakam.
Yeah, Kawhi 65, Pascal low is one of the reasons I liked him. I think he's probably 30, maybe even a little. So I'll go with 65 and 29.
67 and 27.
Yeah, okay. That's yeah. So I'm a fan of Pascal at 27%.
And there's minuscule ownership on Lynn, Damian Jones, Lee, McCaw, McKinney at just under 5, Jerebko just under 9, Norman Powell just under 10.
Just under 10, Norman Powell.
Yeah.
What did he cost? Was he maybe
2K? He's 2K.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe you get the. There's. Like, if you're following the series, it's really hard to imagine where the hell his minutes come from. Somebody's got to get hurt for him to play 20 minutes again.
True. And Iguodala is at 40%.
10% is way too big. Iggy was at 40. Sounds right.
Yeah.
I think we had basically everyone. I can't think of anyone of consequence.
No.
No.
Yeah.
All right. I'm excited. Yeah, that's it's the first day that I look at the ownership and go, I would think people watching the show and paying attention would actually be plus EV.
So let's go Kevon Looney.
Yeah, that's crazy at like 10, 12% ownership. I mean, I understand it with like his collarbone's broken. He's out for the year. Did we say that? We mean he's playing next game. Oh, okay, that happened fast. But, yeah, I mean, it's upper body. If he doesn't re-injure it, he's going to be one of the better plays on the slate. Like, he doesn't need to get a ton. He needs to get 20, which is about his projection. He's going to feel pretty good at that number. So let's go Kevon Looney.
And I agree.
All right, locking it up, my friend. I appreciate having you here as always. We have at least one more show together, but that could be it. Raptors could close it out in 5.
They could. But till then, thank you for having me, and I hope everyone enjoys the game, and have a great weekend, and we'll catch you on Monday.
All right.